Hey everyone, Kyle from Andrew Hilton Wine and Spirits here, and we've got a beer tasting coming up on Wednesday, November 2nd at 6 o'clock. Back in 1995, 10 years after Big Rock was founded and 2 years after Alley Cat, and the same year that the original Drummond Brewing and Red Beer finally went out of business, there was a third Alberta brewery. Years before, 20 years before the big Alberta beer explosion. They were called Brew Brothers. Now, they made some outstanding beers. They had their Prairie Steamer Cream Ale, they had their Tumbleweed Wheat Ale, they had their Ambush Amber, but most famously, they had the Brew Brothers Black Pils, a beer that I remember incredibly fondly, Mike remembers very fondly, Aaron still remembers. This is a beer that, for a brewery that went through bankruptcies and changes of ownership, and they had a tap room, and then they didn't, and then they were draft only, and then they kind of had packaging again. For all the fits and starts and changes, that beer's left a long shadow in the Alberta beer scene. I want to do a little bit of a tribute to it by doing Black Pilsners and Black Lagers, all brewed in Alberta. We're going to start things off here with establishment, of course. You guys are out of Calgary. This is their More Than Rain. It's a Czech style dark lager. Good, but Cabin has the Gloaming. Now, this might end up being my favorite beer of the night, but this one's already labeled as a Black Pils, so gold star to Cabin. Annex also coming out because everybody has to release a dark lager the same week. They have their Casket letters, which is a German-style Schwarzbier. And then finally, Township 24. This is their Meridian Black Lager. This is a brand new brewery for us. These guys are coming out of Chestermere, of all places. So, yeah, a tribute to the Brew Brothers Black Pils, a dark lager tasting, the week of Halloween, getting us kicked off for the November beer tasting series. I hope you'll join me for that. World's longest promo. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our Dark Lagers presentation. Now, we've got a little bit of history to cover here, and we're going to jump straight into all of that. So let's pull out our first example beer here. This is, of course, Pilsner Urquell, the original Pilsner-style beer from 1842, says so right on the can, brewed in Pilsen in current Czechia. Now, the thing is about this beer, it's the original Pilsner, brewed in the original way, and it's from Czechia. But it was brewed by a Bavarian, and the Germans have never really let that go. So while lager beers originated in Bavaria in the 1400s, they would have all been, as all beer was prior to the invention of pale kilned or coal kilned dry malt, which gave you this lovely golden color typical to a Pill or a German style Helles. All beers prior to this particular innovation coming out of Britain in the 1850s, or probably the 1830s, everything that was a lager was technically a dark lager. So every lager prior to, say, 1842 with the first brewing of Pilsner Urquell, dark lager was all there was. So here we have a beer style that was the original lager style from, say, 1450 up to the 1840s. So that's 400 years of brewing beer in exactly the same way, and they would have all been rich, darkly colored, reasonably smoky beers, because until this dry kilning way of malting beer was invented in the 1830s, the only way to really malt beer was to roast it over an open fire, be it made of wood or, in some parts of the world, peat. Some places started actually using just raw coal fires because it burned cleaner than wood. So all malt, to a point, was definitely darker. It was caramelized. It had this darker color. So maybe they'd have been ambers or browns, but some certain would have been what we now consider to be dark lagers. Now, within that dark lager category, we have a few different ones. And I do want to just particularly point out here very briefly that we are not going to spend a lot of time talking about the Blind Enthusiasm Kamakmi Bro, or the Hoyne Dark Matter. Yes, these are both lagers. Yes, they are both dark lagers, but both Blind Enthusiasm and Hoyne, they spurn the idea of having to talk about their beer style. They don't want to fall into the category of Schwarzbier or Tmave Pivo or Schwarzbier or any of the others. So those are dark beers, they are lagers, but they refuse to really be lumped in with anything else. And to a point, these would be very, very much what these dark lagers prior to 1842 with the establishment of Pilsner Urquell would have been. So, why am I just beating this Czech versus Germany thing to death? Well, it's because we're going to jump right in with Tmavé pivo. Now, this is the Czech style of dark lager. Now, most of us have heard of Schwarzbier. I would hope that almost all of us have heard of the term dunkel, meaning dark in German. So a lot of Bavarian dark lagers are simply known as dunkels, and those can become dunkelbox if they're strong, or dunkelweisens if they include wheat. But dunkels are your broad, well-known, best-known dark lagers. I would say that we could probably class all of these as being dunkels. Why? Because dunkel just means dark. Now, within that, the region of Saxony started creating Schwarzbiers, and of course, the Czech Republic had their own style. So whereas a Bavarian invented Pilsner in Czechia, and then the Bavarians turned around and said, okay, well, we're getting our butts kicked by the Czechs here. We need to have a golden blonde lager beer of our own, at which point they invented Hell, or Helles. Not sure what Aaron's on about today. So too with the dark lagers. The Tmavé pivos did come after the German-style dunkels, but let's jump in with this one. This is Establishment's More Than Rain Tmavé pivo, and this is in collaboration with the Rain Dog Bar in Calgary. So this is a Czech-style dark lager made in Calgary, and to my knowledge, the only Czech-style dark lager we've ever seen in the market. Oh, now I know what Aaron's on about. Okay. Now we will get the colorometer here going. And I do want to point out, just while we're filming this, that this is not the darkest beer in the world. You'd never mistake this for a stout or a porter. It's got this lovely kind of, I'm trying to find an angle where the light actually works here. It's got this lovely cola brown character to it. It's not a true black beer. And I do want to put that right up against, even though we're not pouring it yet, something like the Cabin, the Gloaming Black Pils, which to me pours quite a bit darker. Like I can barely see even the intense electric light through that. It is quite a bit darker. I'd also point out that while this has a fairly thin, fairly lacy head, this has a big, thick, sticky, gonna stick around for a while, and also quite tan head, which suggests that has quite a bit more roast to it. Okay, let's jump in a little bit, talk about this beer style. Not one we see very often in North America, as I said. This is, in fact, the first one we've ever had in the store. And we've been seeing more of these Czech-style unique beers coming out of Establishment. I can't think of anyone else who's really working with them. I don't know if it's as closely tied to Establishment's identity as, say, like doing very traditional German styles like this Doppelbock is to Fars, but they certainly have gone all in on it. The Rain Dog Bar is Tom Waits themed, as is the name of this. Yes, it would be. As is one of the beers we thought about doing for this tasting, which was the Tom Waits by Good Robot. Yeah, the Tom Waits for No One, which was, I think, by either Good Robot or Container Brewing. It's one of the two. So I don't get a lot of roast on this. Now, when I'm talking about roast, I'm talking about that distinctly coffee-ish, that distinctly like burnt bread characteristic that you get from a stout or a porter. This for me falls very much into the dark brown and not black category for darker beers. And when I say that, I'm thinking about, like, think of a very good brown ale. You don't get a lot of roast. You get cola, you get coffee, you might get tamarind or date, you might get like brown butter off of it, but you don't get a lot of like intensely roasty, kernely characteristics. And that's kind of where I think this fits. As soon as we move into the Township 24, which will be our second beer, this very much changes. And I think this is going to stand alone to a certain point in that it doesn't have a lot of roast characteristics. And I'd like to make a sweeping generalization that all Czech dark lagers are like that, but this is the only one I've ever had, so I really can't do that. Nutty is a really good call, yes. The other thing I like about these is they're broadly fairly low alcohol. This guy at 5.6, the Township 24 is 5 flat. Yeah, 5 flat. This was a little bit more, 5.2, and this guy was, I think, the strongest. No, 5.1, actually, I was wrong. But they're all between 5, 5.5. They're all very gentle. They all have big flavor without having to bring in high alcohol. Don't get me wrong, I like a double IPA or a Doppelbock as much as the next person, but when you can do a beer that's this flavorful without having to bring the high alcohol, I always appreciate it, especially when I have to drive home after this on those roads.
Summer tires.
On summer tires. Yes, it's all going very well for me tonight. Toffee, yes, but toffee's interesting because it's toffee but not molasses. No, it's not. There's definitely molasses there in the upper nose. Pardon me, I misspoke. Now, I would point out that while this is a very, very old Czech style and is very important to their beer history, in terms of the actual production of Czechia, it is less than 3% of their total production. So it is still made there. It is still like an acknowledged national beer style, but there's probably more of it made outside of Czechia than there is within its home country. Unlike Pilsner, where Pilsner is huge there. I mean, granted, there's still going to be more Pilsners made outside of the country just because of how big Pilsner is. But even with a niche little beer style like this, even inside Czechia, it's not that big a deal. So, ooh, stroopwafel. That's an interesting. That's actually a really good point. Yeah, I actually kind of get that. Thanks, Eric. Okay. Yeah, that's lovely. Okay, now onto a brand new brewery who, I'll be very honest, we brought this in because of all the other dark lagers that I could get at the time. This one had the best reviews. Now, I would like to point out with timing, the very next week, this just got on our shelves today. SYC came out with Darth Lager Dark Lager with the absolutely fantastic, like, Darth Vader looking can. Looks really, really cool. Of course, that came out literally like 3 days too late to do this tasting. So, screw you, SYC. That's not cool. But brand new brewery, Township 24. These folks are out of Chestermere, and this is their dark lager. Now, dark lager, or pardon me, black lager. This is very much a North American style. They're not claiming to be a Schwarzbier or a Dunkel in the German tradition. They're not claiming to be a Tamabe Pivo. This gives them a little more freedom. This could be as simple as, this is our stout, but once a year we make it with a lager yeast. Or this is our porter, but we change up the recipe a bit and we release it in spring. This isn't that for them. This is done very, very much in a, pardon me, faithful kind of Munich-style Dunkel style. But I also really, really like this because it's a year-round beer for them. This isn't a seasonal. Every single other beer here is a seasonal, but for Township 24, the Meridian is actually a year-round beer for them. So I like that in its uniqueness. I also like that we've never had Township 24 before. This beer, I think, is good enough. We might do a Township 24 tasting in the future because of how much I like this. Kevin, you are late. We are just changing to the Township 24, like just as we speak. And Aaron is shining a light through that and picking up some big red notes. That is some real red to it. If only Sky was on the camera.
Get it.
I hope you can get it.
Insanely bright.
It's very bright. Maybe hold it just above, but not so close to the red.
Oh yeah, that's really not picking up the reds. It just looks like brandy. That's always a glass to Chestermere firing its entire city council. I wasn't aware of this. I haven't heard about this. It sounds like a great story,
Does it
though.
have to do with the Klondike vapors?
Ooh. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Now we're, yeah, exactly, Craig. Like, we shift gears hard to get into the roast. This is big, but I think one of the things I really glossed over with the establishment was how soft the water is that they used to make this. This was so delicate, so gentle. The water was just almost not there. It didn't have this stiff, hard water profile, which I do get on the Chestermere beer here. The water was so in the background that it was actually noticeable because of how much it was letting that maltiness shine. Here I'm getting a little bit of stiffer malt. I'm getting a little of acidity from those heavily roasted grains. And I'm also getting like a nice hard water note on this that makes the whole beer seem bigger, brighter. And I will say, if you try to do a beer this roasty with this soft water, the roast would become intensely bitter and the water profile couldn't carry it. So I like how just big and sessionable this is. I think while I loved this at 5% alcohol, I could come back to this for another pint over and over and over. Maybe not in June, July, but like if I was going out to the Owl, wanted to have some pints, I was going to see a show or do trivia, wanted to keep my alcohol intake reasonably low. On a cold night like this, I could see this just being the thing I kept ordering through the evening. This is lovely.
Yes, I could drink 4 of those easily.
As could we all. That's a lovely beer. Well done, Township 24. That's outstanding. You know what? Considering they're coming into a lineup with Establishment, Cabin, and Annex, aka the Meat Grinder, and they're just showing up with their first appearance on the channel this well. Well done, Township 24. You know what? That's legit. I fully respect that. That's a very, very well done dark lager. Now, on the back of the can here, which is not something I noticed before, they're claiming to be somewhere between an American dark lager and a Munich Dunkel. And then they misspelled Dunkel, which is attracting half a point from Township 24 for misspelling Dunkel. But they're right. There is, and we were going to kind of come to this when we got to this Black Pils, but there absolutely is a North American style dark lager that we kind of didn't talk about because it was going to spring it on you as a surprise when we got to the Black Pils here. That is absolutely tremendous. I'm curious how that comes out in color, though. I wonder if this is actually going to be darker even than the Cabin. Yeah, I think that's actually darker than the Cabin.
Wow.
I hope we have these in the right order, then. And if not, it's all Aaron's fault. Okay. Cabin, the Gloaming, Black Pils, the beer that inspired the whole event. The reason we're doing this tasting. The beer that made us remember how good Brew Brothers Black Pils used to be, and just, it inspired all this nostalgia and love and warm feelings in both Mike and myself, because we loved that Brew Brothers Black Pils, and I love this beer too. So let's jump right in with Cabin's The Gloaming Black Pils. So, Black Pils. Not a thing. Not in Czechia, not in Germany, absolutely not a thing. In Czechia, if you're making a dark lager, doesn't matter if you use Pilsner style hops, it's Tmave Pivo. If you're making a dark beer like this in Germany, it's either a Dunkel or it's a Schwarzbier, depending on exactly what type of Germany you are in. Black Pilsner is an entirely North American invention and has no basis in either Czechia, Germany, France, Switzerland, Morocco, anywhere. Like, this is just a North American thing. But it's been around a really long time. Like I said in the promo, Brew Brothers got their start back in 1995. So, you know, we talk about things like New England IPA being an invention that's been here since like 2013 and forward. And like Kettle Sours really coming to the fore 2015 to today. Black IPA slithering its disgusting, oily, filthy form onto the scene about 2008. There are lots of, you know, very modern inventions for the craft beer scene, especially coming out of North America. And that's not to get into all the variations of IPA, like White IPA, Brute IPA, Triple IPA, Session IPA, all of that nonsense. This is something that people were calling a Black Pils, a dark, hoppy lager, way back in 1995. And I did a deep dive looking for, you know, one of the usual suspects. Like maybe Sierra Nevada made a Black Pils, or maybe Dogfish Head. But the problem here is most of the big players in the US Sierra Nevada, of course, did exist in 1995, but a lot of the usual suspects, the people who innovate a new beer style and put it out there, and they take it, they're a very good craft brewery, but they're big enough to be at least half the U.S. and really launch a new beer style. They weren't around in 95. Here in Alberta, all that was around in 95, it was the last year that Drummond was still operating in Red Deer, and then Big Rock and Alley Cat had both been founded in the last 10 years. Like, 95 was the bad old days, and Brew Brothers rocked up to the scene making his Black Pilsner, and I don't know exactly where they got it from. I actually really struggled to find a Black Pils older than Brew Brothers, if only because, you know, there wasn't really websites that talked about beer in 1995 because there wasn't really an internet. And books about craft beer from say 2010 are all completely irrelevant because the industry changes completely every 3 years. Why would you need a book about craft beer from 1995 or 1990 or 1980? These things didn't exist. So in terms of finding records on who brewed the first Black Pilsner, Black Lager of this style in North America, there's almost nothing out there. There's some like clickbaity articles, but there's not a whole lot else. And when you do find an article talking about it, you're like, okay, that's good information. You take some notes, and then you go to the next article and it completely refutes the first one. This is the fun part about craft beer during the period kind of 1989 to 1999, 2000. There's not that much out there about any of this. It's all little scraps and little hints and oral histories that are in like a journal article for like the Santa Rosa Tribune out of Northern California, who was talking about the fact that Russian River Brewing was doing some kind of like dark lager thing. And yeah, they're all pulling from the same original sources, which is not very many. So Brew Brothers Black Pils might have been the first Black Pils. I would put money it was the first one in Canada. Might have been one of the first 2 or 3 in North America. So this is the prototypical North American dark lager. Kind of like a light porter, but fermented as a lager and then hopped a little bit more aggressively. Why do I hate black IPA so much? Because you can take exactly the same ingredients and make something actually good out of it, like this. Oh, this feed's apparently super choppy. I'm gonna blame the weather. It probably has nothing to do with it. Sorry, do we know why this is roastier than More Than Rain? Oh, good question, Eric. So let's talk about that a little bit. Roast on grain is a function of how aggressively it is roasted, and also to a point, the type of grain you select. I find that very heavily roasted wheat shows a lot more bitterness, but also more sweetness than, say, heavily roasted barley. So why would the establishment show less roast? Because it's using a gentler roasted grain, or at least much less heavily roasted grain. So with something like this, they'd probably be using a lot of heavy crystal malt or care malt. They'd probably be using something like brown malt or special Belgian debittered malt. They wouldn't be using something like roasted barley or get the term for the stuff that's like one step below roasted barley, but it's like black barley. And those show a very, very heavy roast, ash, creosote, not so much roast, ash, and coffee sort of characteristic. Creosote can show up in some peated scotches, but doesn't show up in beer. And yes, Craig just answered my own question there. Oh, good. Apparently Facebook's having a stroke. That's great. Love that. So what's the difference between the Township 24 and the cabin here? The Township 24 very much did come off like a stout or a porter that used lager yeast. It was roasty, yes, but it was also sweet. It was soft. It was unctuous. It was something you kept coming back to. I don't think anybody's going to struggle to pick up the very obvious hop notes here in the cabin, the Gloaming, because they're right there. They're grassy. They're a little bit cannabisy. They've got a real distinct like herbal snap to them. Now, they don't actually say what the hop is on this, and neither did the tech sheet that I got from Cabin when I brought this in. But I'm going to guess this is probably Saz or maybe East Kent Goldings, so that we have that very, very spicy European style hopping on this. This is pretty and soft, but still spicy. I don't think it's necessarily as roasty as the Township 24, and yet oddly enough, it may be a bit darker. This one's very interesting to me because it kind of ticks all the boxes. Anytime I have a beer that kind of inspires a whole tasting, it's because I really liked that beer in particular. And I'm curious where everybody else comes down on this, because especially after we do the casket letters, these all kind of fit a range, and then this one's going to stand out because of that pronounced hop note. But it doesn't come off, to me at least, like a black IPA. So I'll be curious to hear how everybody feels about this one in particular. Oh, well, Eric, I do suspect that is an issue on your end. Yes. Yes, I do. And you know what, Kevin? I think that's something of an issue that we're running into here, is we have, you know, the Tomave Pivo. We have somebody who even says this is halfway between an American dark and a dunkel. We have kind of the North Americanized Black Pilsner. And then we're going to finish with the Schwarzbier. Yes, these all fit under this blanket heading of dark lager, which I think even just based on what's available in the market, it was tough to find 4 beers that fit under that umbrella that we hadn't already done recently, like the Hoyner, the Kamakmi. But even within that subcategory, they're all so different. I mean, it's not like we're doing 4 Tomave Pivos, or 4 Schwarzbiers, or 4 Dunkels, or 4 Black Pilsners, however you want to define that style. It's a huge category. There's also just such a tiny, tiny, tiny little sliver of the market that we end up having to throw them all together. But I think we could almost break this out and have, you know, we can't because there aren't enough beers available in Alberta right now, but we could have 4 Schwarzbiers. We could have 4 Black Pils. We could have 4 American dark lagers or German-style Dunkels. We probably could do 4 German-style Dunkels, I'll be honest. And maybe, you know, 4 Tomave Pivos. This could be 4 different tastings, but because dark lagers are such a tiny, tiny sliver of the market, we kind of have to do it this way, and that's why this ends up being a little bit all over the map. And I like that for this because I wasn't expecting that when I came into this. I was like, well, they'll all be dark lagers, they'll be like roasty, they'll be a little bit sweet, this one will be hoppy, and we'll kind of do this thing on a Tuesday or a Wednesday night. No, they're so different from each other, and each of them is very distinctly its own thing, and I like that. With the dogs in. Megan, thank you. Megan, thank you so much. Anyone else craving a whiskey tasting in the near future? Well, you should come into the store on Friday night because we are announcing tomorrow, because it's taken a lot of doing to get everything together here. We are going to be relaunching Scotch tastings on Friday nights in person once again, completely free as always, starting this Friday. The big social media push will begin tomorrow, but I don't mind sneak previewing it a little bit tonight. It's going to be different than it was in previous years. It's not going to be 6 whiskeys a night for 12 weeks. It's going to be 5 whiskey a night for 6 weeks. It's going to be a little smaller. It's going to be a little simpler. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But I wanted to do something this year. I just didn't want it to be the absolute madness of 40 people walking around with a drink in their hand and everyone crammed in this little room shoulder to shoulder of previous rooms or of previous years. We are somewhat deliberately staggering the announcement out, not quite as late as possible. We could do it an hour before, but we are kind of delaying the announcement a little later than we probably should, because we want to soft launch this rather than, you know, put out a front page ad in the Herald. because we want this to be fun and we want it to be back, but we also don't want it to just be as big and loud and as irresponsible as it was before. And we certainly don't want it to be as crowded in here because we're just taking our first baby steps out of COVID, if even that. So yes, Scotch tasting is returning. It's returning in 48 hours, less now. And we will be announcing it tomorrow. But yeah, it's definitely baby steps. So and yes, it is going to be, so just so you know, this Friday, of course, is the 3rd, or pardon me, is the 4th. Next Friday is the 11th, so Remembrance Day. So we are actually going to start the Scotch tastings on the 4th, take a week off for the 11th because I'm not running a tasting on Remembrance Day, and then we will return on the 18th and run the next 5 Fridays up to just before Christmas. So no, I've never done an event on Remembrance Day. I hope I will never have to. And I don't do them on Remembrance Day. We've always taken Remembrance Day off for Scotch tasting going back as long as the store's been around. So bit of an awkward start being that Friday is Remembrance Day, but we will just, we will skip it as we always do. Speaking of skipping things, we have one more beer tasting before Aaron and I both take a week off, because we are both, well, I'm doing a different Scotch tasting that will also be announced tomorrow. But Aaron's in Toronto or some damn thing. So we are doing Doppelbock next week, and then we are taking Wednesday the 16th off. So next week, Doppelbock, the strong dark beers from Bavaria, or in some cases, Alberta. So from Germany, we are going to do the Eyinger Celebrated Doppelbock, the most famous and, if you'll forgive me, celebrated of the German Doppelbocks. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But I mean, this is the reference beer. This is like, you know, talking about West Coast IPAs and not tasting something like Pliny the Elder or something, right? Like you have to talk about the reference beer in the room, and this is that. We're going to follow that up by also doing the Polliner Salvator. Eyinger is not always available, but the Polliner is kind of the number 2 Doppelbock out there. And then against that, we're going to do Fars, because Far does nothing but excellent Bavarian beer all the time. And then we're also going to do Blind Man's new Foeder aged Doppelbock as part of their Foedered Lager series. This is the newest of the new from them. So that one will be an absolute ton of fun. Well, we've been trying to make them a little more fun because they got a little, I don't want to say stale, but just, there was a bit of a period there where nothing cool was coming out and we were scrambling. Yeah, there was a period there where we didn't run out of good ideas, but we ran out of really good, interesting beers just because everybody was putting out a new hazy IPA every week. And it was just like, guys, give us something, give us some thing we can snatch onto for a topic, like, you know, Cabin and Annex releasing a dark lager the same week. Good, we can build around that. But oh bloody summer, it was just nothing but the same. And it got really hard to come up with interesting topics because the breweries weren't giving us anything to latch onto in terms of interest. We should take the sex bus. Yeah, the sex tetanus shot bus. God. Fuck. So disappointed in that bus. Ugh. I think I'm still recovering from the bus trip.
Was it a sex shot bus?
It was you could reach your hand through the rust holes into like the luggage compartment under the bus. The air conditioning vaguely worked. Yeah, that was not the bus that I was sold in the brochure. The bus that I was sold in the brochure didn't have giant rust holes and super sketchy air conditioning and did have a bathroom.
Yeah.
And could hold more than 13 people comfortably, yes. I have been recovering from talking about the shady sex bus, yes. Kevin, I would love to bring in more Far. The problem is the only beer from Far, actually I shouldn't say it, the only beer with alcohol in it from Far that I can get right now is the Doppelbock. I can also get their alcohol free, but the far Heffa, the far Helles, the far Dunkel, the far Hoppy Heffa, they're all out of stock at Connect and have been for like 5 weeks. So my far section actually just got absorbed to put something else out there, so I didn't have an entire empty shelf in the beer fridge. When they come back, far will come back, but like I can't have a whole empty shelf in the fridge. It looks weird. It looks like we're going out of business or something.
That's interesting.
And we need another bus trip. We will be doing another bus trip, just we're not doing the tetanus sex bus. We're just not. We're not. We've talked about this. I think what we'll do is we will rent a passenger van. We'll have Sky the intern drive it, and we'll do it that way, because I could have bought that bus for less than we rented it for. It was a disaster. I'm hoping Far's okay. I'm hoping it's a shortage of cans or a backlog at Connect because of Christmas. But yeah, we're really hoping Far's okay. But I haven't heard good or bad one way or the other on that. So here's hoping everything at Far is good, but I haven't heard one way or the other yet. So, but yeah, it definitely has my back of my brain questions start popping up, like, when everything from a brewery starts going out of stock, what's happening at the brewery? Oh, there we go. Tyler pops in. Yeah, they're moving into a new place. So that might just be the answer right there. Okay, so Annex Casket letters. This is a Schwarzbier, which is different from the Bavarian tradition, does not include that traditional Bavarian yeast. So Bavarian yeast always leaves you with this clove and banana and spice and this little bit of residual sweetness. Schwarzbier doesn't. Schwarzbier, or literally black beer, tends to be roasty and dry and usually the darkest of all of the German beers, regardless of region. Excuse me. So I like this beer a lot. Not really sure where everything's going to come down in terms of ranking, but this is maybe to me the closest to a lagered stout or porter. If you just poured me a pint of this and told me it was Annex's new porter, I might believe you. Like, of all of these, this is probably the most stout-like, the most porter-like. This is big and roasty and rich and fat. And again, it feels bigger than 5.1. Now, this is a German beer style that very much went by the wayside, and not for any particularly good reason, except that for exports, what came into the market first from Germany? Bavaria. When I first started here in 2000, what did we have on the shelf back then? Schneider, Eyinger, a couple of the other Bavarians, probably Erdinger back in the day. But we didn't have anything from Saxony. We didn't have anything from, say, oh, that word's just, the place that makes the Ex-Schlenkerlas. Bamberg. There we go. We didn't have anything from Bamberg. We didn't have anything from like central Germany. Everything came from this Bavarian tradition, which Schwarzbier isn't part of. It's its own unique thing. Much like Kolsch only comes from Cologne, or Berliner Weiss, you'll be shocked to know, predominantly came from Berlin. This was not part of the Bavarian tradition. This was its own thing, and as such, it struggled. Schwarzbier now is reasonably well known. Alley Cat, they made a black lager for a very long time called Schwarzkat, and I don't know if they still make it, but that was a really nice Alberta-made Schwarzbier years and years before anyone else was making one. It might have been, or it definitely would have been contemporaneous with the Brew Brothers Black Pils, so Alberta actually had a couple of different dark lagers, and I think that, and don't quote me on this, but I think Big Rock had moved basically over everything into being lagers before they discontinued Black Amber, which was a really nice beer that Big Rock used to make. Like most of the beers Big Rock used to make, and none of the beers they currently make. It was really nice. I think that ended up being a dark lager by the very, very end as well. So yes, if anyone wanted to say we're on a bit of a roll in terms of quality, yeah, I think we are. What takes it? I'm not going to rank them. I can't. They're so different, and they're all so good.
Really?
Yeah, really. Like, this was so soft, and the water profile was so perfect, and it was delicate and interesting and sessionable. This is probably the beer on the table I could drink the most of. It's something I would always want another sip of. It's great. If it lacks anything, it lacks maybe some of the complexity of the others, but it also balances on this knife edge between American and German styles so beautifully. And you just end up with a beer that's not too weird, not too familiar, just right down the middle. The Black Pils here, it adds the hop notes that are really fun, but not in a terrible black IPA way. It ends up being really grassy and fun. And then the Casket letters is just huge. That's a massive dark lager for 5.1% alcohol. That's an absolutely gigantic beer. And yes, I think Township 24, purely on the strength of the Meridian, has earned themselves a tasting, so do look for that before Christmas, assuming I can get 4 other beers from Township 24 at the same time. Yeah, this one is unrankable. This is a hell of a lineup. All of these, except the Township 24, are on my shelves right now. I will be bringing the Meridian in next week. But yeah, this is a heck of a lineup. And Township 24, you've earned a shelf spot. You've also earned your own tasting coming up. Let's see if they can just keep the hits coming. Next week for Doppelbock, 2 weeks out from a break. Until then, I'm Kyle. It's been Aaron and Sky. We wish you all a wonderful rest of your night. Stay warm out there, everybody. Good night.